That dock comes down by Friday, or we cut it down for you. The water past your seawall belongs to the association now. That was Diane Pruitt, president of the Cedar Hollow Lakeside Association, standing on my gravel turnaround on a Tuesday morning in the spring of 2019, reading off a clipboard she held like a subpoena. The dock she wanted gone was the one my wife and I had built by hand the summer before Karen got sick. The water, she said, belonged to the association, was a private lake my family had owned since before her subdivision was a cornfield. What Diane did not know, what she never once thought to check in, 4 years of fines and threats and posted notices, was that the lake bed itself, every acre of it down to the low water line, was deeded to me. Not licensed, not shared, owned. So, if you were standing on your own gravel with a woman telling you the water in front of your house was hers, what would you have done? My name is Walt Hendren. I was 62 that spring, a retired water rights examiner who spent 31 years for the state reading deeds, walking boundaries and settling exactly the kind of argument Diane Pruitt thought she was about to win. I sat at a counter in a county office and told ranchers and developers and married couples and old widows where their land stopped and where their neighbors began. And I learned that the people who lose are almost never the people who are wrong. They are the people who cannot find the paper. I live on the north shore of Sable Lake, 40 acres of pine and water in the hills, in a cedar house my grandfather framed in 1951, on land his father bought in 1911. The lake is mine, not the shoreline. The lake, the water, and the ground under the water, all the way across to the cattails on the far bank. There's a difference between owning the shore and owning the lake, and most people never learn it. And that difference is the whole story. Let me back up, because the dock was never really about the dock. My great-grandfather, Amos Hendren, bought this ground when the only road in was a logging trace. He bought it for the water. There was a spring-fed pond on the parcel, no bigger than a stock tank when he found it. And he dug it wider with a mule and a slip scraper over 3 summers and dammed the outlet with his own hands and his own money, hauling fieldstone and packed clay until the little earthen dam held. When the spring filled the basin behind it, he had made a lake where there had been a puddle. And when the county recorded the deed in 1911, they recorded the impoundment with it. The lake that filled behind that little earthen dam was an artificial body of water created entirely on private land. Under the law of the state, an artificial lake built on your own parcel, fed by your own spring, is yours the way a barn is yours. Amos knew that. He was not an educated man, but he had watched neighbors lose creeks and springs to men with better lawyers, and he was determined that what he built would stay his. He had it written into the deed in plain language. The waters impounded hereon, and the bed beneath conveyed in fee. 11 words that took me about 4 years to need. My grandfather kept the deed in a tin box on a shelf above the wood stove, and once a year, in the cold, he would take it down and unfold it and read those words out loud to whoever was in the room, like a man reading scripture. My father kept it in a fireproof safe and was less ceremonial about it, but he made sure I knew the combination before I knew how to drive. I keep it in a labeled folder because I spent my whole career watching people lose ground they actually owned simply because they could not put their hands on the paper. I sat across a counter from grown men who had paid taxes on a piece of land for 40 years and could not produce one document to prove it was theirs. And I watched some of them walk out, having lost it. I learned young that the deed is not the proof of the thing. The deed is the thing. Karen and I bought the place from my father in 1998, moved up for good in 2004. We raised our girl here. Karen was a school teacher, 3rd grade for 26 years, And she had a way of being patient with the world that I never quite learned. She loved the lake more than I did, if that is possible. And the dock was her idea. We built it the summer of 2015, the two of us in the shallows with a post driver and a level. Her holding the posts plumb while I drove them, both of us up to our knees in cold spring water and laughing about it. She painted the cleats blue because blue was her color. And she stood back when we finished and said, "Now it is really ours." She got sick that winter. She was gone by the spring of 2016. I tell you this not for sympathy, but because you need to understand that when Diane Pruitt fined me for that dock, she was fining me for the last thing my wife and I built together. And she never once thought to wonder what the dock might mean to the man she was fining. Sable Lake is 41 acres of open water at full pool, ringed on 3 sides by my pine, and on the 4th side, the south, by a low saddle of hills where, in 2014, a developer named Royce Pruitt cleared 60 acres and built a subdivision he called Cedar Hollow. 62 lots, a clubhouse, an entrance with a fake stone wall and a brass sign. And every brochure, every flyer, every banner staked at the county road sold the same thing: lakefront living, your private mountain lake. It was not their lake. It was never their lake. Their lots backed up to the south saddle, and below the saddle was a strip of marshy ground, and below that was my water. Royce Pruitt sold 62 families a view of a lake he did not own one drop of. And his wife, Diane, got herself elected president of the homeowners association he created. And she decided that the cheapest way to make the brochure true was to take the lake from the old man on the North Shore who clearly did not understand how things worked anymore. She misread me from the first day. People did. I am a quiet man. I do not raise my voice. When somebody stands on my gravel and tells me a lie, I do not argue. I write it down. Diane saw a slow, agreeable retiree in a flannel shirt, and she thought slow meant weak. That was the trap, and she walked into it one polite notice at a time. The first contact was friendly, or wore the costume of friendly. Diane drove her white SUV up my road in the summer of 2015, the one with the vanity plate that read Lake Life. And she got out in white sneakers that had never seen mud and a linen blazer over yoga pants, which is a thing I have never understood, dressing like that to drive up a gravel road in the hills. She had her clipboard even then, tucked under her arm like a schoolbook. She asked if I would consider joining the association. Community standards, she said. Aesthetic harmony for the whole lake. We are trying to keep everything consistent, Mr. Hendren, so the lake stays beautiful for everyone. I told her I appreciated the offer, but my parcel was not in her subdivision and never had been. She tilted her head and smiled the way you smile at a child and said, "The lake belongs to all of us, Mr. Hendren. We are all stewards here." I said the lake belongs to me, and I said it plainly, no heat in it. And I went back inside. Through the window, I watched her stand on my gravel a moment longer than made sense, looking out at the water like she was pricing it. That was contact 1. I wrote the date on a legal pad that night, and I started a folder, and I labeled it Cedar Hollow. I did not know yet how thick it would get. For about a year, nothing. Then in the fall of 2016, the first notice came, taped to my gate in a plastic sleeve, the kind real estate flyers come in. It was an association citation, official looking, with a logo and a fine and a little tear-off remittance stub at the bottom like a utility bill. $75 for an unapproved structure visible from association property. The structure was my dock. I had built that dock with Karen in the summer of 2015. The two of us in the shallows with a post driver and a level. And she had painted the cleats blue because blue was her color. And now, 6 months after I buried her, A woman who lived a quarter-mile away across water she did not own was fining me for it. I stood at the gate a long time, holding that notice. I did not pay it. I did not call. I photographed the notice in the plastic sleeve, then took it out and photographed it flat, logged the date and time, and filed it. Citation 1. $75 I would never pay. The notices came faster after that. Diane had discovered that the threat of a fine felt like power, and power was the thing she was actually shopping for. By the spring of 2017, I had a stack. Unapproved dock, unapproved boathouse, which was really just my grandfather's old shed with a tin roof. Unauthorized watercraft, which was my 14-foot aluminum fishing boat with a 10-horse motor. Improper signage, which was a no trespassing sign I had every right to post. Each one carried a number, each number climbed, and each one I photographed and filed without a word. My daughter, Nell, was 17 that spring, living with me since her mother passed, and she was the one who started helping me document. She had a good eye and a steadier hand than I did with the small stuff. She set up 2 trail cameras, one on the gate and one angled down the dock, one feeding a card I checked weekly and one feeding a drive in the house, because she said if it is only in one place, it is not really saved. She was right. She was 17, and she was already a better record keeper than half the men I trained over 31 years. I want to tell you about a Saturday in June of 2017, because that was the first time Diane said it to my face with witnesses around. It was a clear morning, the lake flat as glass. The kind of morning Karen used to call church weather. I was on the dock with a cup of coffee, and Nell was on the bank with our dog, a big rangy blue heeler named Scout, throwing a stick into the shallows for him, when I heard an outboard from the south end. Diane came down the south shore in a pontoon boat full of association board members, 6 or 7 of them in deck chairs like it was a party, motored straight across my water and cut the engine 10 feet off my dock. She had her clipboard. She had her sunglasses pushed up on her head. And she announced, loud enough for the whole flat lake to carry it, that my dock was in violation, that my boat was unregistered with the association, and that the North Shore was, in her words, functionally part of our community's jurisdiction. Functionally. I have thought about that word a lot since. It is the word people use when they know the actual word is no. I did not get up. I kept my hands around the coffee mug, and I said the lake is private property, and you are on it without permission, and I would appreciate it if you turned that boat around. One of the board members, a younger fellow in a ball cap, looked down at the deck and would not meet my eye. Diane did not waver. She said, "We will see about that, Mr. Hendren," and she told her pilot to make a slow circle of my dock so they could photograph it. And the pontoon swung around once, twice. Every phone on board pointed at the structure my wife had painted. And then they motored back south, the wake slapping my pilings long after they were gone. Nell got all of it on the trail camera and on her phone, the whole slow circle. That night, we filed it. Confrontation 1. I wrote down the names of every board member on that pontoon, because I had a feeling some of them would matter later. And the young one in the ball cap, a man named Ben Ott, turned out to matter most of all. Now here is the part I did not know in 2017, the part I only pieced together over the next 2 years, and I am telling it to you now the way I learned it, in order. Royce Pruitt had a problem, and it was a money problem, which is the only kind of problem that makes a man send his wife to do what Diane did. Cedar Hollow was not selling. The lots that backed up to the south saddle, the ones the brochure called lakefront, did not actually touch the lake, because the lake was mine and the marshy strip in between was a buffer he could not build on and could not drain. Buyers figured this out fast. A man would drive up with his wife, all excited about lakefront living, walk the back of the lot, and discover that between his property line and the actual water was 100 yards of cattails and a no trespassing sign on the far bank, and that the lake itself belonged to some retiree who might fine him for putting a canoe in it. You cannot sell that twice. Word gets around a small county. Royce needed the lake. Specifically, he needed to be able to tell buyers, and more to the point, the bank that was financing his second phase, that the association controlled lake access, that there would be a community marina and a swim beach, that the water was an amenity he could deliver on paper. He could not deliver it because he did not own one drop of it. So his wife was sent to get it the cheap way, through fines and notices and the slow grinding pressure that makes old people tired enough to sign something. That was the engine under the whole thing. It was never about my dock or my boat or my grandfather's shed. It was about a construction loan and a sales brochure and a man who had promised a lake he did not have. I did not know all that yet. What I knew in 2018 was that the pressure changed shape. It got meaner. In the spring of 2018, my customers started getting calls. I still did a little consulting work in retirement, boundary disputes and water rights opinions for a few longtime clients. And one of them, a rancher named Pete Salas, who I had worked with for 20 years, called me on a Thursday evening. I could hear his supper dishes in the background. He said, "Walt, I got a strange call today. A woman from your homeowners association." He said she told him I was operating an illegal commercial business on residential property and that anyone doing business with me could be named in a complaint. Pete laughed when he told me, a short, dry laugh, because Pete knew me and knew there was no homeowners association anywhere near my land. He said I told her she had the wrong fella, that you have been straightening out my fence line since before she moved to the county. Then his voice changed. He said, "But Walt, not everybody's going to know you the way I do. Some folks are going to hear illegal and complaint and just stop calling." He was right about that too. 2 clients I had worked with for years quietly stopped returning my messages that summer. And when I finally reached one of them, he was cool on the phone and said he had decided to go a different direction, and I knew what direction that was. I logged the Salas call, word for word as he gave it to me. I logged the silence from the others, with dates. Harassment, customers, add it to the folder. Then came the fake inspector. On a Monday morning in August of 2018, a man in a polo shirt with a laminated badge clipped to his pocket showed up at my gate in a white truck with a magnetic sign on the door that said, "Regional Code Compliance." He had a clipboard too. Everybody in this story had a clipboard. He said he was there to inspect my dock and my, quote, water impoundment for safety violations, and that he had authority to order the structure removed if it failed. I asked to see his credentials. He tapped the laminated badge on his chest like that settled it. It had a logo on it, an eagle over some kind of shield that looked official and meant exactly nothing. I asked which agency he was with, and he said Regional Code Compliance, like saying it twice made it a real thing. I asked him who he reported to and what statute gave him authority over a private impoundment. And he got flustered and said he just did the inspections, ma'am sent him, and then caught himself. Ma'am, I had spent 31 years working alongside actual code officers and actual state inspectors, sat in the same break rooms, signed the same forms, and I knew every agency that had jurisdiction over water in those hills by name and by face, and Regional Code Compliance was not one of them. It was a sign somebody had ordered for the side of a truck. I did not argue with him. Nell came out onto the porch, and I gave her a small nod, and she lifted her phone. I took his picture. I took a picture of the truck and the magnetic sign and the plate. And I noticed the magnetic sign was not quite straight. peeling up at one corner. I told him he was on private property, and the gate was closing. And I closed it. And he stood there a second, deciding whether to make something of it. Then got in his truck and backed down my road. Then I called the county, the real county. I asked if anyone or anything called Regional Code Compliance had any standing to inspect anything in the county, and the woman on the line put me on hold, came back and said, "No, sir, there is no such agency. That is not a thing." I asked her to note that I had called. I filed the photographs and the time of my call to the county. Fake inspector. The folder was getting thick now. 2 inches of it in a binder Nell had bought, and every page in it was a page Diane Pruitt did not know I was keeping. That fall I went to see a deputy I knew a little, a man named Cole Webb, at the county substation. I laid out the timeline, the notices, the fines, the pontoon, the calls to my clients, the man with the fake badge. Cole listened the way good officers listen, without interrupting, and when I was done, he rubbed his jaw and said, "Walt, here is the hard part. Most of this is civil. The fake inspector, if you can show he claimed government authority, that might be something. For the rest of it, though, the way it works is, somebody files a complaint, we have to respond to it, even if it is garbage. Because the complaint is the thing that puts us on your road." He told me the truth, which is that the system rolls on whoever files a complaint, not on whoever happens to be in the right, and that is not corruption. It is just how the machine is built. Then he said something that turned out to be the most useful sentence anybody gave me in 5 years. He said, "Build the pattern. Document every single contact, dates and times and witnesses, and the day one of them crosses a real line, the whole pattern comes in with it. Right now you have got a pile of paper. Get me a crime, and the pile of paper becomes a case." I went home and I told Nell what Cole had said. And she said, "So we just keep filing." I said, "We just keep filing." She was 18 by then, home from her first semester of community college for the weekend. And she sat at the kitchen table and reorganized the whole folder by date and category. And she said, "Dad, when this ends, it is going to end fast." She was right about that too. Through the winter of 2018 and into 2019, the notices kept coming. I want to give you the count, because the count is the spine of this. By the time Diane stood on my gravel that Tuesday in the spring of 2019, the folder held 41 separate documented contacts, 19 written notices and citations, 11 fines totaling $4,200, not 1 cent of which I had paid or ever would, 4 recorded confrontations with witnesses, the calls to my clients, the fake inspector, and a stack of trail camera images that put a date and a time on nearly all of it. 41 contacts, 0 of them lawful. I had a clean record and a thick folder, and across the lake, Diane Pruitt had a sales problem getting worse by the month and a husband leaning on her to solve it. Which brings us back to the dock comes down by Friday. When Diane gave me that deadline that Tuesday morning, she was not bluffing, and that was new. Before, the threats had been paper. This time she had a date and she had a plan. I did not say much. I said, "The dock stays, the lake is mine, and you are welcome to take that up with anyone you like." She smiled and said, "We will see," and she drove off in the Lake Life SUV. I went inside and I called Cole Webb, and I told him I thought something was coming Friday. He said, "Keep your cameras on and call me the second anybody touches your property." Friday came. I want to tell it slow because it is the day everything turned. It was an overcast morning, the lake the color of pewter, no wind. A little after 8, I heard the diesels before I saw them, and then 2 trucks came up my road and stopped at the gate. Not Diane. A crew. 4 men in work clothes and high-visibility vests, and in the bed of the second truck, on a trailer, a small excavator, the kind with a thumb on the bucket for tearing things apart, and a set of bolt cutters with handles as long as my arm. I watched from the porch. One of the men climbed down, sized up my gate chain, and put the cutters to it, and the chain dropped into the gravel with a sound I felt in my teeth. They swung the gate open and drove onto my property. They backed the trailer down toward the dock, my dock, the one Karen painted. And the foreman, a heavy-set man with a gray mustache and, of course, a clipboard, stood on my shore and read off a work order that said the structure was to be demolished by order of the Cedar Hollow Lakeside Association, effective that date. Nell was already on the phone with the sheriff, standing in the doorway where the house camera would catch the whole yard. I walked down to the foreman, and I did not raise my voice, because raising my voice has never once helped me. And I said, "You are on private property. That gate was locked, and you have cut a chain and driven equipment onto land you have no order to be on." He waved the work order at me without really looking at me. I said that paper is from a homeowners association that has no jurisdiction here and no authority to demolish anything on this property. He shrugged, the way a man shrugs when he has decided his paycheck is not his problem to think about. And he said, "Take it up with them, mister. We are just getting paid." And he turned and signaled the excavator operator to start unloading off the trailer toward the dock. That was the line. That was the crime Cole Webb had told me to wait for. Trespass after a cut lock and destruction of property under color of a fake authority. Nell had every second of it on 2 cameras. I stood between the excavator and the dock, not as a hero, just as an old man who knew that if I was standing there, they could not legally bring the bucket down. And I called Cole, and I said, "They cut my gate and they are about to demolish my dock." And he said, "Do not move and do not touch anybody. I am 8 minutes out." He made it in 7. Cole Webb came up my road with his lights on and another unit behind him, and he stepped out and told the crew to shut the equipment down. And the lake went quiet except for the diesel ticking as it cooled. And here is where 5 years of paper became a case in about 10 minutes. Cole asked the foreman for his authority. The foreman produced the work order. Cole read it and asked who signed it. And the foreman said the association president, Mrs. Pruitt. Cole asked the foreman if he understood that the gate had been locked and the chain had been cut. And the foreman started to say he was told the association owned the access, and Cole stopped him and said owned by whom. And the foreman did not have an answer, because there was no answer. Then Cole turned to me and said, "Walt, do you have something for me?" And I said I do. I went up to the house, Scout at my heel the whole way, and I came back down with the folder, the whole 5 years of it. And on top of the folder, in a clear sleeve of its own, was the deed, my great-grandfather's deed, recorded in 1911. The paper soft as cloth at the folds from 100 years of careful handling, with the 11 words in plain language. The waters impounded hereon, and the bed beneath conveyed in fee. I handed it to Cole. I did not make a speech. I did not say "I told you so" to anyone, because there was no one there worth saying it to. Only a confused crew shutting down a machine and a deputy bending his head over a piece of paper older than anyone standing on that shore. The lake was dead quiet. The excavator had gone silent. Nobody spoke. Cole read the deed. He read it twice, his lips moving a little on the legal description the second time through, the way you read something you want to be sure of before you say it out loud. A breath of wind came across the water and moved the cattails on the far bank and died again. Then Cole looked up, and he looked at the foreman, and he said, "This lake is private property and has been since 1911. There is no association jurisdiction here. None. You cut a locked gate and brought demolition equipment onto a man's private land on the strength of a work order signed by somebody with no authority to sign it. Shut it down, all of it. Load the machine. By then, a county vehicle had radioed in, and within the hour, there was a second deputy and a sergeant. And the work order, the cut chain, the trucks, the excavator, and the trail camera footage were all part of a report. I gave them a copy of the folder. 41 contacts, dates, times, witnesses, and a deed older than the state's current recording system. The sergeant flipped through it on the hood of his truck, and he looked at me, and he said, "How long have you been keeping this?" I said, "Since 2015. He said, "This is the cleanest documentation I have ever seen from a private citizen." I said, "I used to do this for a living." Here is the paired arithmetic of that morning, the two numbers I want you to hold next to each other. On one side, a deed recorded in 1911, 108 years before that excavator rolled down my shore, conveying the lake and the bed beneath it to my family in Furi. Never challenged, never clouded, never paid a dime in association fines. On the other side, a work order signed 48 hours earlier by a woman who had never once read that deed, ordering the destruction of a structure on land she did not own, backed by 41 unlawful contacts and $4,200 in fines that existed only on paper. A century of clean title against 2 days of forged authority. That was the whole case, and it was over before noon. Diane Pruitt arrived as they were loading the excavator back onto the trailer. She came up my road in the Lake Life SUV and got out fast, clipboard in hand, and started toward Cole, demanding to know why her contractor was being stopped. Cole met her halfway and asked her one question. "Did you sign this work order?" She said of course she did. The association had every right. And Cole said the association does not own this lake, ma'am. And you have just put your name on an order to destroy private property on land you do not own. I watched her face do the thing I had waited 5 years to see. It was not triumph for me. It was just the moment a person realizes the floor was never there. What happened after happened fast, the way Nell said it would. The trespass and the criminal mischief and the cut lock were a real case, and the county filed on it. The part that brought the whole scheme down, though, was the deed. Because once the deed was in the record, everything Royce Pruitt had built on the lie came apart. The bank that financed Cedar Hollow's second phase had been told the association controlled lake access and that a community marina was coming. There was no lake access. There never had been. When the financing documents and the sales brochures met the recorded reality of my deed, the second phase collapsed. The bank pulled the construction loan. The lots that had been sold as lakefront were quietly reappraised, and a group of the buyers, the ones Royce had sold a lake he did not own, filed a civil suit of their own against the developer for misrepresentation. The thing Diane tried to take was lake access. What her own overreach destroyed was the very thing her husband needed lake access to deliver. The flood she tried to start fell on her own development. There was a defector too, and I should tell you about him. Because Cole had told me back in 2018 to write down the names on that pontoon, and one of them mattered. The uneasy young board member from the June 2017 confrontation. The one in the ball cap who would not meet my eye, a man named Ben Ott, came forward on his own. I never asked him to. He called my attorney and asked to give a statement. It turned out he had kept his own quiet notes for 2 years, dates and meetings, because the association's actions had bothered him from the start, and he gave a sworn statement that the board had been told repeatedly, in plain words, that the lake was not theirs, and had been instructed to proceed anyway because, as he quoted Royce in a board meeting, Royce needs the amenity for the bank or the whole second phase is dead. That one sentence turned a property dispute into evidence of a knowing scheme. Ben did not have to do that. He had neighbors who stopped speaking to him over it. He did it anyway, because some people, when they finally see the floor was never there, decide they would rather not be standing on it when it goes. Diane resigned the association presidency before the year was out, and not by her own choice. The homeowners, the same ones she had claimed all along to be protecting, called a special meeting and voted her out once they understood she had exposed every one of them to liability over a lake that was never theirs to fight for. The brass sign at the entrance still says Cedar Hollow. The second phase is still a cleared field with the survey stakes rotting in the weeds and a faded banner that still promises a marina to nobody. And the lake is still mine. Every acre of it down to the low water line. Exactly as it was in 1911 when the county clerk pressed his stamp into my great-grandfather's deed. I had the gate chain replaced with a heavier one and a real keyed lock. And I had Nell help me repost the shore properly. Fresh signs every 200 feet on good galvanized posts. And then I did one more thing. And I will admit it is the only part of this whole business that felt like more than record-keeping. I had my attorney draft a formal notice to the Cedar Hollow Lakeside Association on the strength of the recorded deed, stating that the waters of Sable Lake were private property in fee, and that no association watercraft, including the pontoon, were permitted on them at any time. It was the same letter, in shape and in tone, that Diane had tried to serve on me for 4 years. A structure in violation. A vessel not permitted. Cease and remove. The only difference, the difference that turned out to be everything, was that mine was true and recorded and 108 years old, and hers had been a costume. Their pontoon never came across my water again. The first warm Saturday after that letter went out, I sat on the dock and watched the south end of the lake, and the pontoon stayed tied to their bank. And the lake in front of my house was as quiet and as mine as it had been the day Amos finished his dam. Nell was there the evening it really ended, the day the county confirmed the criminal filing and the bank confirmed the loan was dead. She was 19 by then, home for the summer. We sat on the dock Karen built, the one with the blue cleats, and Scout lay between us with his chin on the boards. And Nell said Mom would have liked how this turned out. I said, your mom built this dock. I said she is the reason it is still here. The water was flat and going gold at the edges the way it does in the evening, and a loon called from the far end, and for the first time in 5 years, nobody was coming up my road. We did not say much after that. We did not need to. So here is the lesson. Plain, because I promised you one at the start, and a man should keep his word. If you own land, get the deed and read it. The actual recorded deed. Not the title summary and not what the realtor told you. Read the legal description and walk it against the ground. Know what you own down to the words, because someday somebody is going to tell you that you do not own it. And on that day, the only thing that will save you is the paper. Recorded and in your hands. Keep a folder. When somebody puts a notice on your gate, do not argue with them and do not pay them. Photograph it, date it, and file it. Get a second copy off-site the way my daughter taught me, because a record that lives in one place is not really saved. Be polite, be calm, and be patient, because the people who overreach are almost always counting on you to either give up or blow up, and a folder does neither. The law is slow, but it is not blind, and it rewards the person who showed up with the paper. Diane Pruitt had a clipboard and a costume and a husband with a bank problem. I had 11 words my great-grandfather had recorded in 1911. The 11 words won, the way they were always going to, the moment I could put my hand on them. If you have got a story like this, an HOA or a board or a clipboard that tried to take something that was yours on paper, put it in the comments. I read them. If this kind of story is what you come here for, The calm kind, where the deed wins, and nobody has to raise a fist. Subscribe and stay close. Next time, I am going to tell you about a man whose HOA paved a road straight across his recorded easement while he was at his wife's funeral, and what he found when he pulled the original 1962 survey out of the courthouse. Until then, read your deed. Walk your line. Keep your folder. I will see you on the next one.